on that note, once again, welcome to Dev.Play 2019. I will give the stage to the first speaker from our business track, Falko from Joypac.
Thanks so much. Oh, well, this works. All right. Yeah. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks Dev.Play for having me. Quick word about me. My name is Falko Bocker. I'm in the games industry for coming up 13 years now, spending most of my time on free-to-play games. Back when PC MMOs, free-to-play MMOs were hip, and now spent the last couple of years in mobile. And currently I'm working for a company called Joypac. Joypac is a publisher that is kind of split between Beijing, China, and Copenhagen, Denmark. And we're publishing hyper-casual mobile games. And a lot of the data that I will show you today comes from, of course, these games. The reason why we're set up in this way is the Chinese market is very interesting to a lot of people, but it's hard to get into. And it's also a little bit hard to work with Chinese publishers sometimes. There are language and cultural barriers, time zone, and that's why we try to handle most of this stuff when it comes to talking to our developers from the European studio, also when it comes to like how these partnerships are shaped, to give more of a Western experience to the developers we work with. But when it comes to UA monetization, there's a lot of knowledge that we actually have in China. So the first part of the presentation will deal more with the data in China, and then I'll get to compare it a little bit with a game that we recently launched globally. We have some games that we only launched in China, basically from other publishers, some developers that self-publish, that cannot handle that market by themselves, because it's like, yeah, very difficult, very different. While now we're starting to get into global publishing as well with a couple of developers. You're probably gonna hear a bunch of like really cool talks, very entertaining stuff. I saw the list of speakers, like really good people there. I'm not that entertaining myself, so I will be throwing lots of graphs and big numbers at you, and UA speak and analytics kind of lingo, and I'll try to explain it as good as possible. It's sometimes hard to gauge how much people already know. If you have any questions afterwards, come up to me. I'm happy to explain everything to you. The data that you're going to see today is going to be mostly iOS based. So when we're talking China, I'm talking iOS. When I'm talking chart positions, it's most downloaded games on iOS. So Android, especially in China, is a completely different beast with a lot of legal hurdles to jump through. And the process is completely different. There are dozens of app stores. You cannot use Google Play. That's a talk all by itself. If you are interested in that, I'm also happy to talk about that a little bit later with you. But I have like three major elements that I want to talk to. I want to talk about two games separately first. One that is like our biggest hit in China. And that was an Asian developed game, not Chinese developed, but Asian developed game that did very well for us in China. Then what was a decent success for us in China, and that is a Western developed game, so there are a few different, but it's also a different kind of game, so I think it's interesting to look at these two slightly different variations of hyper-casual and compare them to each other. And then, yeah, comparison, I'm going to compare those two games with each other first, but then I'm also going into a game that we recently launched globally, and see how that performed in China versus Western countries. So the first game I want to talk about is Skip School, made by Eureka Games in Japan. Very small studio, especially when we started working with them. It's a small puzzle game, kind of goes back to some of those point-and-click adventure games that you might have played, where you have these mini puzzles. You're a student that tries to get out of school, right? The teacher is coming for you, and you have to try to use the different things in the environment to like get away from him, hide from him, like join a huddle of football players, kind of to dodge him. And there are also a lot of different fail states and fun ways of you to mess that up and be caught by the teacher. So that game for us was a top 10 download hit in China. It actually peaked as the third most downloaded game in China for a day. It was in the top 5 for a couple of days, but it was in the top 10 pretty consistently for a few weeks. And to get to that point in China, for us that meant 200,000 installs a day to be in that top 5 range. And of course, it depends a lot on like when you're launching your game, when the game is live. So during Chinese New Year, where everybody's going to be downloading a bunch of games because everybody has time, you're going to need higher numbers than on other days. In our experience, in China, we need a little bit more for the same chart position than in the US when it comes to the download numbers. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what you would need to get a top 5 hit in the US. The game then went a little bit down to the top 10, where it stayed for a bit at around 80,000 to 100,000 installs per day. And we launched that game very early this year, and up to this point it accrued about 10 million installs overall. Of course, very front-loaded. Now it's not in the top 10 anymore. It's like dwindling down. It's a little bit of the problems with hyper-casual games, that they don't stay up high in the charts as much as some other genres. The other game I want to talk about is Fluffy Fall by Kilosaurus and What Games. What Games, a French publisher that is very well equipped to publish outside of China themselves, but they felt that they could reach a little bit more of an audience working with a local publisher. Fluffy Fall, or the Chinese title translates roughly to Pom Pom Adventures. It's a kind of endless arcade game where you control a cute Fluffy that falls down a tube full of terrible death traps, like lasers, saws, flamethrowers, and you're trying to avoid these while collecting some coins to unlock more of these Fluffy skins. And a couple of the ones that you're seeing there are ones that we specially made for China, especially for the Chinese New Year, some like lantern designs and stuff. They were very popular with the audience there. So Fluffy didn't do quite as well as Skip School, although it did very well for us. It was in the top 50 for a while. It peaked at around 30 in the most downloaded charts. And to be in that range for us meant that we needed to have about 30,000 installs a day. And this added up to 1 million. So you already see like a big difference between having a game in the top 50 and having a game all the way up in the top 10. But let's like compare these games, because while they are hyper-casual games, there are some fundamental differences, I would say, in the way they're designed, and that has big impact on all kinds of things. First things first, on the revenue of the game. So in Skip School, the vast majority of revenue comes from interstitial ads that automatically play after you finish a level, either winning or losing it. And there are lots of opportunities for that in Skip School, because levels are usually between 30 seconds to a minute, depends a bit on how much you play around in them. And that gives us a lot of opportunity to show like quick ads to the players, even the ones that are not making use of the rewarded ads functions. While in Fluffy Fall is more of an endless game. So if you're really good at the game, you can play for a couple of minutes until you die, right? The levels, like the endless game gets more and more difficult, but you can play like 5 to 7 minutes if you're good at the game. But then the motivator, once you're coming out of that, is you collected a bunch of coins that you can use to unlock new Fluffies, and of course that is an incentive to watch rewarded ads to double those, right? And that is one of the big fundamental differences when you come to design your hyper-casual game, and you see a lot of games moving more towards a level-based system, even though you would think like, hey, this would perfectly work well as an endless game as well. But the amount of ads and the way you can engage with your players is a little bit different depending on how you design your game. So you should keep that in mind from the beginning. And there are a couple like smaller things up there, and don't underestimate those. There's banner ads make up for 3% of Skip School's revenue. And banner ads are like, yeah, nobody really loves them, right? They look a little bit ugly, cutting off a little bit of your game on the bottom. And for 3%, is that even worth it? If you get the volume, 3% might well be worth it, because that we're talking about a couple $100,000 here that you have by having those ads. But it depends a bit on the market you are in. I would say in like Western markets, it's sometimes a bit more problematic. The same goes for interstitials. The more interstitials you show, it will have a negative impact on your retention. In China, we see that it's a bit easier, like people are a bit more used to seeing lots of ads around them, so you can be a bit more aggressive without having too much of a negative impact on your retention numbers. Fluffy Fall, at first look, performed really great compared to Skip School, right? Skip School was the first game, Fluffy Fall came a bit later, and we saw 25% higher eCPMs, so we made 25% more money on every ad that was shown, basically. And the lifetime value of a user, the amount of money we made per user, was also 23% higher than with Skip School. That has a couple of different reasons, right? Rewarded ads usually net you a little bit more money. However, one thing that was a bit different for Fluffy is the organic rate was a bit lower than it was in Skip School. So in Skip School, we only paid for about 45% of the players coming in, while 55% found the game organically in the store. And for Fluffy, it was a mirror image of that. Reasons, of course, being higher in the charts, more people gonna skim through the top 10, but not necessarily down to number 30. So more people find it that way. And we believe that Skip School being kind of like this, get out of school game, also kind of motivates children in school to kind of share the game. So it's a bit more viral in that sense. But that does have an impact on your revenue, right? Because like we didn't pay for the 55%. Like we have 10% more players that we didn't pay for in Skip School. So the pressure on keeping the cost per installs low are a bit lower on that kind of game, especially because sorry, I lost my train of thought here. Yeah, especially because the margins are so thin in hyper-casual games, right? You get hundreds of thousands, millions of users pretty quickly, but yeah, you can buy them super cheap, but hyper-casual game users don't stick in your game very long. If you have 10 to 15% of players still there after a week, that is not uncommon. So you cannot retain the players as well as in other genres of games. So these margins are really thin, and stuff like that are really important factors that you need to optimize and actually keep making money. And that was the big problem of Fluffy Fall in the end. CPI, so the cost per install in marketing, were 50% higher than they were for Skip School. So that meant in the end the higher eCPMs, the higher lifetime value of a user didn't really matter that much, because in the end it got more expensive to buy a user than what you actually made back on a user very quickly. There are ways to kind of predict or evaluate a game early on to get a rough idea of when that point will come. We do a lot of testing at Joypac with early versions, and one thing that we look at that not every publisher looks at is what we call IVR. You will see it having a lot of different kind of names in different companies, but basically what it is, it's the impression to install ratio. So if you show an ad to 1,000 people, how many of those will end up installing the game? I believe we had equally good creatives, like marketing material for both of those games. We had playables. For Fluffy, we had 3D and 2D versions. We had videos, banners. So that makes a difference, but I think in this case they were pretty comparable. Still, Skip School just clicked better, both literally and figuratively, with the players out there. So for every 1,000 ads we've shown for Skip School, we ended up having around 3 people install the game, while for Fluffy it was just under 2. And we also use this of kind of like early on, it's a good way to get a preview of the addressable market that you have, right? So of course it depends on how you make marketing. We choose a marketing channel that is very wide for that reason in that case. If you have a hardcore trading card game and you're targeting hardcore trading card players, of course the data will be looking great in the beginning, but once you run out of that audience, it will change very quickly. For hyper-casual games that are very wide anyway, you can get a bit of an idea how big your market is, and that means when, like how long it takes until those cost per install starts rising and you'll run into problems. And also how fast you can push the game. Because of course, if you get more installs per impression, if you have a big marketing campaign once the game goes out, you really want to push it up in the charts to get that visibility that I mentioned early on for the organic factor and a few other things. So one game that we launched both in China and the West is Oddman. It's developed by Snail in Denmark. It's a quirky kind of like action battle game where you swipe around to throw little monsters off little islands. Very fun game. And I don't have a bunch of data on it. It's about 500,000 downloads overall, spread over different countries. We just launched it about a month ago and start improving the UA, increasing the amount of players that we put in there. But it should still give you a good idea. The first slide for that, a lot of people will probably say like, yeah, the place where we show the most ads is where most of our installs coming from. But I still think that's interesting because it shows a bit that marketing is not that different in different countries. So, of course, this one has a slight bias towards the Chinese side because we're Chinese publishers. We usually start with marketing there until we optimize it in that country and then move into other countries from there. But if anything, it shows that it was a bit easier to market the game in the US for us because while only 33% of the impressions were from the United States, 36% of the installs came from that. So while you might consider China to be this market that works completely differently, there are so many players and it's super cheap to advertise, but then you get like way less players out of all the ads or whatever. Like, no, it's very comparable, much more comparable than you think. The same goes for the organic rate of the players. In both versions, about 13%. Of course, the game is still pretty low in the charts. It doesn't have that much visibility. We're working on a feature, but that didn't happen yet. So organic rates are fairly low at 13% across the board. So that's the same for the US and in China. And I looked a bit at the download numbers in both. And we are roughly at the same stage when it comes to chart positioning as well. I tried to make a nice graph that shows you how downloads relate to the chart positioning, but that doesn't really work because weekends behave completely differently. And then we had a public holiday, Chinese National Day in China, where downloads went up like crazy, but the chart position go up like that. So it's very hard to like make a direct relation between the two. But roughly, it was the same in both countries, while in China we needed a few more downloads to get to the same chart position compared to the US. Organic users behaved pretty similar in both versions of the game. There was very slight difference, but when it comes to like the behavior in the game, like outside of marketing, we started seeing some difference. Specifically for people that we got through paid advertisement, that is something that's more of an accepted fact in the West, that people that you get through ads are going to perform much better than people that just organically find your game on average. For us in China, that was not necessarily the case, a little bit, but in the US, that boost was much higher than in the Chinese version. Players were just more involved. Players in the US spend 20% more time per day in the game, and they also retained 10% better in, actually it's 10 percentage points better for day one retention. So people that come back after one day, that was much better in the US for us than it was in China. However, one of the really big things that we had is that the amount of money we made per player was twice as big in China. Of course, we're a Chinese company. We have been publishing way more games in China than we have been in the West. So there's a slight bias. We should be a little bit better there than we are in other places. But let's say it's the same. I still think that is something that people wouldn't necessarily expect of a market like that about a lot of Asian markets. When you think China, you think like, oh, like hundreds of millions of devices, and you have so many installs, and then you make very little money. But the amount of people that is what will actually make the difference. And that is partially true for Android, but as I said, the Android market is a mess to deal with anyways. Right now it takes 8 months or more to get your game live, and you have to work with a Chinese partner in China, while the iOS market is way more accessible. And the iOS market, as I said, we need a little bit higher download numbers. Overall, there are more players, or a comparable amount of players playing games on iOS in China. There's a rising middle class. Everybody who has money gets an iOS device. Not everybody, but comparatively. So the amount of money that you can make with a Chinese iOS player, both on in-app purchases and on advertisements, is parallel to what we're seeing in the US. So it can be a super attractive market if you're not already in there. And especially, like, even if you work with a partner somewhere else, right? Make them commit to something for you in China, right? Like, either get a commitment of how much marketing they will do there, keep that license separate, because some Chinese companies will be willing to pay for it, especially if the game performs well in the West, or get some other kind of commitment out of your Western publishing partner. And most publishers will actually be open to, like, make a step towards you on that, because they know it is a big market. I'm not saying that the US is a small market, but I'm just saying that it's like way more equal than you think it is. So yeah, in conclusion, the marketing in China is not as different as you might think, especially these days where you have a lot of like local marketing channels. You can work through a partner. For iOS right now, at least, there are not that many legal hurdles. You can just put your game live in China. There's some localization, of course, to be done, and Chinese players are a bit particular about that. So even when we test the game, we at least localize the App Store page, and those of you that have games on Steam and didn't localize them to Chinese, you might have heard about like a big backlash of people getting angry there about no or bad localization. So that is something you have to do. But specifically for hyper-casual games, don't overthink it. Those games, you don't need to completely change the games. When you talk in mid-core, hardcore games, yes, it's very different in China. You have a lot of local competition. But hyper-casual games, the nice thing about them is the gameplay just translates very well around the world. So you don't need to make huge adjustments to reach that market. And on the other hand, gameplay-wise, you will see a little bit different behaviors, but it's much more important how your game is designed. So don't think about like, do I want to make a game for China? Do I want to make a game for the West? When you're making a hyper-casual game, think more along the lines of, where's my revenue coming from? What is the player journey like? Yeah, they're having fun in the missions, but then do I want to interrupt them? Should it be in endless games? Those things should be on your mind from the beginning, and you should test as fast as you can. Like a lot of games, as I said, the margins are so thin. If you work forever until your hyper-casual game is done and put it out there, you might have wasted a lot of time, because you then find out that it's not marketable to a price. Like, it doesn't matter how good your game is if nobody's ever going to hear about it, or it's so expensive to get people aware of it that you're losing money at the end. For every player you get through advertisement, you're just not throwing your marketing money down the drain, but also the development time you could have spent on maybe coming up with a different core gameplay loop or a different setting. And yeah, that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, yeah, I'll be around both days and happy to talk to you.
Hi. We do have time for 2-3 questions.